Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and today we're going to talk about the history and philosophy of magic in Marvel and DC. So we began a Patreon request by Jeremy Renfro, something that he was asking for based on the science of various superhero characters that I've covered so far as part of some videos we've been working on here at Comic Island. This is something that I actually had already thought of and wanted to do before Jeremy had asked of it, meaning that we were both kind of thinking along the same lines. Although I was more thinking of doing this for specific characters, and probably will in the future. So for example, while it's fun to look at the characters of Superman or The Flash through a scientific lens, I always figured eventually we'd get around to doing characters like Doctor Strange or other mystical themed superheroes and villains from a more philosophical point of view. But Jeremy asked for me to cover the general history and overall philosophy of magic within Marvel and DC in a more general sense, looking over these two throughout their time period as publishers in the Western world, and how they've used magic to aid in storytelling in various effective ways. So we're going to do a journey of both of those things at once, traveling through the history of Marvel and DC and their use of magic, while also talking about various philosophical ideas that have been explored through magic by both Marvel and DC over the years. But keep in mind that we probably will be doing more of these kind of comics in the future, dealing with humanities and how they relate to superhero ideas and themes, as well as specific characters going forward. So please, if you have any suggestions for those, leave them in the comments section below. They'll definitely be helpful. And be sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, so that you hear about these videos when they eventually get made. We do take all requests, not just from patrons, it's just that Patreon-based requests get made first. And to that end, sit back and relax as we go over the history and philosophy of magic in Marvel and DC. I don't actually have a trick, I just thought I'd fake you guys out. In the city of Milan, a man's life slowly fades away. His name is Pietro DAmico, and before he dies, he wishes to explain the evil events that led to his wife's death, and soon, his own. It all began 2 months ago when the couple stumbled on an antique store. They found a mirror which the shopkeeper insisted was not for sale, claiming it had an evil history and a sinister past. Pietro's wife, Camille, was taken by the mirror and begged her husband to obtain the antique at any cost. Heeding his wife's pleas, Pietro hired 2 men and together they stole the mirror, knocking out the shopkeeper during the robbery. The mirror instantly changed their lives. While Pietro didn't like his appearance in the mirror and avoided it, Camille fell in love with her own reflection, staring at the mirror for hours. Within a week, late in the night, Pietro woke up to hear his wife speaking to the mirror, and a strange demonic visage calling out to her. Pietro quickly intervenes and Camille faints, so the man covers the mirror with a sheet. This appears to work and things go back to normal until a week later, when Pietro wakes paralyzed and helpless as his wife returns to the mirror and enters through it. Inside the mirror, Camille finds a strange world and a fearsome demon greeting her as queen. He says an entire kingdom awaits her, and he presents the woman to her new subjects, an army of strange beings and demons. They all begin to mock her, and the demon explains that in here, they see her for what she really is, stripped of all pretense and illusion. Camille begins to flee, finding her husband in the mirror back in their home. But Pietro can only see the demon, so he shatters the mirror with an axe. Glass erupts around the room, fatally cutting Pietro, while, too late, he hears his wife calling out to him from within their now shattered mirror. With the last of his strength, Pietro writes all of this down to warn others of the doom that befell Camille and himself. From the earliest days of comics, magic was a force in storytelling, essentially touching on every tenet it offers in fiction. In superhero comics, Wonder Woman is one of the first and foremost to come to mind, and is an excellent example of magic simply being used to inform every bit of Wonder Woman's mythology from the very beginning. She was not alone, with characters and series from the then burgeoning Western comic book industry in the 1930s and 40s relying on magic as a storytelling device. Magic was everywhere right from the get-go, from informing the powers and abilities of a random villain to the source of content in and of itself. My favorite example of magic being used in fiction from this era, aside from fun and campy stuff like Stardust the Super Wizard or this era of Captain Marvel, has to be how it was used to inform content such as horror. It's easy to forget how these comics were back in this time period, especially before the Comics Code Authority really seeped in and for a time essentially ripped the teeth out of the industry. But before that happened, we got stuff like Atlas Comics' Marvel Tales, an early and important series in establishing this company into the force that would one day become Marvel Comics, created as one of many genres publishers were pushing out at the time, trying to appeal to as many different markets as possible. As such, it was here during the earliest age of comic book history where we saw one of the most primary and important aspects of magic. It's spooky. Magic is, after all, by definition, just about every form of everything supernatural happening and informs many various creatures and beings in horror fiction. It represents something fun and exciting about magic, that it is inherently unknowable. Often, especially in this early era, employing ideas fronted by figures such as Edgar Allan Poe or H.P. Lovecraft, these horror comics best represent something that would come to be seen for many years in both Marvel and DC, that magic, while potentially useful and potentially something you could master and use for yourself, could never be fully understood, never quite be fully trusted, and never fully in your control. That power existing outside of rarely has context or predetermined information that lets us know what it means or what's going to happen, representing and creating a certain sense of fear and an external, uncontrollable threat unique to magic. We don't know anything about magic because it's unprecedented by design, even in well-regarded and well-fleshed-out franchises at this point. So in the decades that would follow of Marvel and DC history, when we would come to see characters such as Swamp Thing, Constantine, and even random characters like Carnage facing and being confronted by these supernatural beings, that's magic in action, often at its best and often to horrifying and wonderful extents. From dark demons to primordial forces beyond our understanding, magic can change everything in a story in mere moments. And when a writer is capable and desires so, can often be done in terrifying ways. It reminds me of how creepy and sinister the Scarlet Witch could get in her darker days decades later. Technology, in comparison, can be similarly powerful and dangerous, but we don't often see it being used like magic in this regard, say to wipe out the entire mutant race in the blink of an eye. There's something very scary about that. Truly powerful magical superheroes literally only a breath away from a very violent genocide. A single person losing control could wipe out an entire city, or a country, or a continent, or a planet, or if they connect to the wrong universe, like say, opening a portal into the Cancerverse, then all of reality as we know it could be overrun with these terrifying, magical monsters called the Many-Angled Ones from Marvel lore in a mere instant. Everything in reality could theoretically just be wiped away with a single powerful spell. We don't know the limits of magic, so we cannot rule anything out. Because magic has no constraints, no precedent we are fully informed of, or any true limitation beyond the powers of the individual at hand, magic can be, well, anything, and therefore, in the right context and done correctly, horrifying. A single spellcaster could wipe the floor with the entire Justice League if they knew what they were doing. They could conquer any version of Earth, rewriting reality in a way that most people wouldn't even question the change to begin with. We've seen that happen more than once in both Marvel and DC. It's this version of magic we most often see in the Game of Thrones franchise, and it owes to how George R.R. Martin writes magic as this ancient unknowable force, this thing of the past nobody fully understands, with its own motivations and behaviors that no character in the story truly knows the full nature behind. I find that take on magic particularly scary, and a lot of it traces right back to the golden age of comics, especially as we look over the early roots of Marvel and DC. Magic would, after all, not only be a source of great storytelling in masterpieces like the Hellraiser series, but it would also become a sort of domain in and of itself within these two companies. With characters like Wonder Woman and Doctor Strange coming to represent this force, magic became a source of power for any number of characters, heroes, and villains, and pretty soon it would come to exist at the side of technology, genetic mutation, alien physiology, and many other reliable sources and explanations for characters' powers. And magic, with all the power and none of the constraints of technology, would often serve as a useful source in the coming decades to explain these new characters and their powers as they emerged. As the Comics Code Authority began to set in, comics and their scope gradually narrowed to more traditional superhero storytelling. Wonder Woman, beautiful as Aphrodite, wise as Athena, swifter than Mercury, and stronger than Hercules, sets out to answer every appeal for help that reaches her, unaware of the incredible adventures fate has in store for her, when SOSs come from the most unexpected places. It all began on Paradise Island, where an extraordinary new invention from Amazonian Professor Alpha will allow Diana to transport herself anywhere in the world where her help may be needed. Though it has not been tested yet, Diana is fearless to charge into the device when an alarm sounds asking for help somewhere on Earth. That is to say, someone. The fearsome beast is no match for Diana, who is able to save the caveman and even tame the dinosaur. She returns back in time, only for the machine's alarm to sound once again, and Diana to take off to her next adventure. Wonder Woman, protect us from these giant insects! Wonder Woman, help us overthrow this dictator by throwing a giant shock put around the planet. Wonder Woman, roll your lasso of truth up into a ball and throw it at those Martians. Great! What follows in the comic book industry next is, relatively speaking, bland. Comics became what they are still often thought of exclusively as to this day. A series of short, shallow superhero adventures almost entirely designed to sell gum to children, and to be fair, this was the original purpose of comics to a rather large degree. It was not always exactly the best climate suited for creativity, and it would be some time before superhero comics, and Marvel and DC stories, to start getting really ambitious and creative once more. In the meantime, magic started to become exclusively used for one of the many possible uses in storytelling. And not a bad one either. Magic is a lot of damn fun, after all. Sure, comics became sort of this monolithic entity, one designed almost exclusively around the principle, one that was kind of known for a very goofy tone and lacking the scope and scale of the modern age, or even the earlier era of the comic book history before the CCA kind of became a thing with Marvel and DC comics. And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with this aspect of magic being front and center in superhero stories. With characters from the earliest point in comic book history drawing their power from magic, and it going on to inform and define major blockbusters like Infinity War, magic has become an essential part of superhero storytelling on a level easily comparable to science and technology, genetic alterations, and alien stuff. It represents an entire domain of power within both Marvel and DC, as discussed. Both companies have developed entire teams around it, while it is borderline standard to include some sort of spellcaster on any given superhero or supervillain team. As a result of that, both companies are flush with not only a full roster of magical characters, but often huge potential franchises for both companies in major ways. Doctor Strange, Wonder Woman, Justice League Dark, Constantine, Ghost Rider, Iron Fist, and many others not only represent great characters within themselves, but also full rosters of villains, supporting characters, and a deep lore from which their stories can be told and have been drawn from and built around for decades now. Just because something is fun doesn't mean we should overlook it or look down on it like we're somehow better than it. I say that not so much because anyone in this equation is guilty of that. Obviously, both Joey and I have a lot of love for fun and this supposedly superficial superhero stuff, but there's still a lot of people in the world of critique and academia who stubbornly look down on all of this as some form of lesser entertainment. I cannot agree with that from any perspective. A life without fun, thrills, and adventure to me is a life devoid of meaning and happiness, and I refuse to curtail to any suggestion that there's something wrong with enjoying this aspect of anything, magic included. So, the Golden Age of comics and the Silver Age of comics would largely treat magic as the source of power comparable to any other origin for superhero or villain's enhanced abilities. It doesn't really matter because this entertaining and fun aspect of magic would always remain a critical part of how it was used in storytelling from both Marvel and DC. It's a path both companies have strayed from at different time periods, but one that they really shouldn't be avoiding. It's simply too essential and too great at this point for either of them to avoid. Within a couple of decades, this would be an important factor for the mind-bending fun of the early Doctor Strange comics, while later, in the modern era, it would inform many great moments and awesome series that really don't require anything more of magic than in empowering a hero or a villain in a fun storyline. And in recent years, magic has led to awesome moments in superheroes in all sorts of creative and different ways. That's because magic frees writers in a wonderful way. I don't believe in the slightest in real-world mysticism, but I love it as a plot device for this reason over any other. Magic in fiction being fun matters more than anything else to me, because it allows writers and artists the option to do just about any crazy thing they can think up. From the boundless worlds of hell, filled to the brim with demons, to planes of existence beyond human understanding, magic is a wonderful opportunity to take advantage of the free-form nature of comics and just go nuts with raw, unchanneled creativity. We just don't get to live in a world with magic, so why not enjoy the fun possibility of it vicariously through storytelling? That's kind of the whole point of fiction. But it's not where things truly got interesting. Things really started to change with the advent of people like Jack Kirby, who, drawing from both magic and science, created essential characters for both companies, becoming a pioneer in the next important era of comic book history, which I promise we'll be covering very shortly.